Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I'm here today with Andrew Eliopulos, author of Will on the Inside. This book, at least according to my knowledge, is the first book I've read, and maybe the first book ever, we'll have to find that out, who has a character that is growing through a diagnosis and subsequent figuring out how to live life with an autoimmune condition, Crohn's disease. Do you know, Andrew? First of all, welcome. But is this the first book ever to do this? Because I have not found one.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Stephanie. It's great to be here and talking with you and your listeners. It's a great question. I know there are books for adults with characters with Crohn's disease, and I know there is another book actually this year, another book with a queer character with Crohn's disease, and that middle grade book is called The Year My Life Went Down the Toilet, and I very much recommend it. So because of that book coming out at the same time as this one, I think that author and I were both trying to figure out if there were other books for middle graders out there, and I'm not sure if there are.
So, I haven't found them.
Remains to be confirmed.
Yeah, I was looking and I found yours first. So technically it's first in my book. So I love collecting quotes. And I know one of my favorite quotes was actually a Stephen King quote. And he said, "Books are a uniquely portable magic." And to me, I really think that uniquely portable magic is in the ability for books to help readers be seen and to see, right? Whether that's because of age or race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual identity, challenges they face, health problems, whatever that is, books offer opportunities for readers to feel seen and heard and validated, but also to get a perspective on what life might be like for others. And I truly believe that your book especially is that portable kind of magic. I loved Will on the Inside, and I am so glad that you are here to talk about it today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That really means a lot. And I love that quote.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. So why don't we jump in with some introductions? Do you want to give the listeners a little bit of your backstory and how you came to be here today talking about your book?
Sure. So Will on the Inside is actually my third novel for young readers. My first book, The Spider Ring, was also for middle grade and was more for that Goosebumps loving middle schooler that I was growing up. I read so many Goosebumps books growing up. Yeah. And then just to skip ahead and include a little bit more of my bio, I was a children's book editor for 13 years. And actually one of the first books that I edited on my own was a short story anthology with R.L. Stine at the helm, which was a huge honor. And I got to ask him, "Do you remember writing Night at Terror Tower," which was my absolute favorite Goosebumps book? Wow. And he absolutely did. He has a fantastic memory of every single book he's written. And I was floored to see that. So that was my first book. It was genre, it was horror, a little bit of magic. Because actually I thought every book that I wrote would have a little bit of magic in it. Jumping ahead again. So my second book for teens was called The Fascinators. And that one also had magic in it, but it was set in suburban Georgia in a place similar to where I grew up. And then that brings me to Will on the Inside, this third book, which is also set in Georgia, And this one does not have magic in it, although I actually did try to write a couple ways with genre
Oh,
elements at first, um, before I realized they all felt completely beside the point, because this book is based on some of my own experiences and feelings growing up. I have Crohn's disease. I was diagnosed at 13, right at the time in between football and soccer season. I had been on the football team and was kind of struggling through some practices and just thought it was because I just, wasn't tough enough for football. And then during tryouts for soccer, I could not keep, I was getting noticeably more tired with every tryout. And finally, some tests that I'd done with my general physician, pediatrician doctor, came back showing that he, excuse me, wanted to send me to a specialist because it seemed like there was something more wrong, which at the time was actually something of a relief, because I realized, like, oh, it's not just because I'm that bad at soccer and football, it's because something's going on.
right.
And so that kind of informed this book. And again, like I said, it is the first book that I have written that doesn't have that genre element. And I've heard from some reviewers that feel like, oh, that must be, they don't say that it's easy, but I think they think that it's more based on my life than it actually is. And in fact, I think channeling the parts that were close to my own experience were some of the hardest parts of writing this book, and letting go of those magic and horror genre elements that I normally lean on when I'm trying to write something for kids. So
Although I might argue that there's just a different kind of magic that happens
Mhm.
to be on the inside of the character, and the transformation in so many other ways that takes place. It maybe isn't the typical kind of magic, that we think about in terms of a fantasy aspect, but I definitely say there's the magic in inside.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So how was that, writing a book that probably felt like part memoir, part middle grade fiction?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because so Will in the book is a soccer player, and I mentioned that I had played football, was trying out for soccer, but I won't pretend that I was a excuse me, I won't pretend that I was a big lover of team sports at the time. I was also doing, the science Olympiad and the math team, and those were a little bit more my speed in middle school. However, in my middle school, and I think this is true of, a lot of people's middle school experiences, I would do anything to feel like I belonged and I had found my group. And so many of the kids that had been my friends in elementary school were joining the team sports. It felt like supposed to do. I was in band as well. I was just looking around for that sense of belonging. And so one of the reasons why I made Will such an avid soccer player in this book, is one, that I wanted to get at that feeling of wanting to belong in middle school and what a disease diagnosis does in that time, right as you're trying to fit in, right as you're feeling like that standing out for any reason would be the worst possible thing, to suddenly have this diagnosis and to have that get in the way. Having a team sports anchor really helped me to dramatize that. But the other thing that it helped me to do, that I was like one of the hardest challenges to tackle with this book, is to give a narrative arc to chronic illness, because the reality of my life at decades later after being diagnosed is that I still have Crohn's disease. It's incurable. There are some days when I don't notice it because I'm very fortunate to have a good medical team and to be on a set of medicines that's really has been working for me for a while. But then there are the days when I really do notice it, and when it still feels like the day I was diagnosed. And so I didn't want to give a message to kids like, here's a character who gets this diagnosis, and then by the end, he's magically cured and everything that's related to Crohn's disease is going to be fine forever. Because I knew that the kids reading this with Crohn's or with any chronic illness would feel like they needed to see the reality that it doesn't go away represented. So having the team sports anchor, again, what that also allowed me to do was to have a character first diagnosed is less able to understand like the forever aspect of a chronic illness than he is able to understand, wait, I don't get to do the championship tournament. Like
Right.
I have to sit on the sidelines because this diagnosis means that I can't play soccer right now. And so I was able to get that narrative arc by, compressing the big lifelong chronic illness experience down into the experience of having to be sidelined on a sports season. Um, and once I decided that that's what I was going to use, it became a lot easier to sort of infuse parts of my own experience, but also to separate my experience from Will's because again, I was not so sad to not make the soccer team at the time.
Right.
And so knowing that this was a kid who this was his driving passion, this was
Yeah.
the thing that he was so sad to lose, really helped me inhabit this other character, and keep us a little bit separate.
Yeah. I think that's a good point to mention too, because, as you said, Will is kind of grappling with this new reality, but he's also just a normal kid who doesn't want to stop doing what he loves, even though he has to. And I opened up saying that this book, especially, helps some readers to feel seen and some readers to see. And even if a child is reading this who doesn't have a chronic illness, who isn't going through a health challenge, there are kids who are crazy about sports, but for some reason or another are sidelined, right? There's so many, I think, different entry points for kids that the book is not just about Crohn's disease, right? It's an important part of it. But I love that you have other themes that are really important, because any of us with a chronic illness, and I'm raising my hand there as well. It's why I went and grabbed your book. That's not who they are alone. There is much more to it. So I'd love if you could talk about some of the other themes, some of the other really important threads that are in the book that really just make it so accessible to so many readers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate your saying that. And it's funny because I think one of my worries with writing the book was that the more threads that I tried to weave in, the more specific I got to this one character's experience, almost like, the harder it would be for any reader to pick this up and see their experience reflected in it. Because I think, just to bring up a buzzword that I was thinking about a lot as I was writing this book, but it's a buzzword because I have my master's in social work, and it came up in every class that I took. But thinking about intersectionality and thinking about the ways that when you have more than one way that you feel marginalized in society, how those things overlap and create a unique experience. And so what I'm getting at here is that Will is not just dealing with this Crohn's disease diagnosis. He's also at the point in his life when he's starting to wonder if maybe he's not straight, because like I said, he lives in Georgia like I did. He lives in a city that, where a lot of his friends are religious. He goes to church. His parents, his older sister, are all avid churchgoers. And he's in his Sunday Bible study class, the Weekend Warriors, in a group that they're all starting to ask big questions about religion. They're right at that age too. So this is a character who it's called Will on the inside because he has so much that he's already been wondering even before this diagnosis. And then the way that those all interact and compound, I mentioned earlier, he's a character like so many middle school kids who just wishes he is a normal kid, like you said, in a lot of ways. But one of the things that makes him a normal kid is that he wants to feel normal, and he
Yes.
doesn't really feel normal. He feels like, if my friends on the team really knew all these questions I had about, whether I'm straight, or if the guys on the team knew that I had these questions about my religion, what would they say about me? And so now suddenly he has this diagnosis that he can't hide. He can't hide the way that he's been hiding these other things that he's been thinking about.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I was worried when I set out to write this novel. I as a children's book editor, I recall the times when, I would hear the feedback from a colleague, or when a first draft of something was coming in, like, oh, this has the kitchen sink problem. you know, this feels like this character just has one too many conflicts, and we really need to focus on this one. And I don't think anyone ever said that because they thought kids can't handle more than one conflict. I think it's one of those things where it's just about reader expectations, or what you get from the flap copy or the descriptive copy when you pick up a book, like, oh, this is the book about this, so I'm not expecting these 4 additional conflicts thrown in there. It can really be hard to make them all feel like part of the same thing. But for me, because all of those elements that I just described were facets of my own real experience, it was really important to try to find that way to make them all work together. And so again, it was because I had that great soccer championship tournament hook that allowed me to like compress the timeline. It was finding that way to compress the other elements, like how do I have him exploring his sexuality or questioning his sexuality, exploring his religious identity in a compressed timeline. And the sort of plot device that I ended up coming up with, because another thing that was true of my middle school experience, and I think is still true today, I was asking a lot of people with kids in middle school to make sure, but is like the school dance experience, is that drama around, like, whether it's your homecoming dance or, we had like I think we had 2 or 3, some of which were sanctioned by the school, some of which were just like thrown by the community, but so many opportunities for a dance, every one of them an opportunity for drama. And so, not only is Will dealing with this championship tournament, but there's the spring dance that his friends have just started inviting their dates in these big elaborate ways, hoping they'll go viral on TikTok, or, like promposals do these days.
Yes.
And so he's right in that moment where he's actually a little bit relieved, like, oh, maybe the fact that I have this diagnosis will mean that people will like give me the out, or they won't be expecting me to ask anybody to this dance, or, maybe not even go to this dance because I feel like not even sure if I want to. But that was the thing that anchored that compressed timeline around, because so the final thread that I haven't mentioned is that because Will misses one of his soccer practices early on, he bumps into a kid at school, Griffin, who he knows about because Griffin was the Cowardly Lion in their school production of The Wizard of Oz last year. So he's seen him. Griffin's on his radar, but they haven't really interacted until when he's forced to miss his soccer practice. Will sees him at the pickup area, and they start a conversation and find a shared interest in a video game that Will has seen but never played really before. This video game is called Mirror Realms. And so what is great about a video game for a kid with a Crohn's disease diagnosis is that whatever's going on, with your body that might make you have to sit on the sidelines for sports, or might make you have to run to the bathroom, if you were of things, if you're just on your computer playing a video game, it's not an issue.
Right.
So he befriends Griffin. Great to have a friend he can play video games with. And the fact that Griffin seems to be gay, and that's certainly, the word in school, because Griffin asked another boy to the dance. That becomes one more thing that Will is, tries to keep on the inside, doesn't tell his friends that he's starting to hang out and play video games with this other boy. So even as I'm saying it all out loud, I'm like, it sounds like so many threads. I revised the book enough times that I hope I managed to balance them all. But yeah, I hope that gets at all the threads you were thinking of.
It does. It does. And it all worked together beautifully. It does feel like, as you break it down, it might feel like a lot to a listener who hasn't read the book, but it was just the most natural kind of progression, the way that everything came together. You picked a perfect title, right, for this book when you described that, like, so many things are going on in the inside. I'm just curious of How did you, and I guess your experience as a children's book editor too, how do you get that perfect title like this to capture what this book is about?
I um it's a good question. I wish I were one of those people who could come up with a title, the perfect title first and then write to it. I did not, and I think I mentioned earlier that I was trying to fit some kind of genre elements. And so the early titles for this were various iterations of like boy name and the monster, or, it was like, so I had name and the blank going for mini drafts of this book. And then it finally became realistic. And then I had this moment where you just realize, like, you have that eureka moment, and I realized, like, okay, he's got these big questions and he's got this disease. That one of the things about Crohn's disease and about a lot of autoimmune diseases is that you don't often have any outwardly visible symptoms. You might be taking a medicine I did and like Will does, that's a steroid that starts giving you visible side effects. But before that medicine, or if you're not taking a medicine like that, you might look to the world like you're not going through anything. And so that becomes a problem in middle school, when again the last thing you want is to constantly raise your hand and announce to the class that you're going through something. So a lot of times people don't even understand that you're very sick on a given day.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of around the moment when the inside started to coalesce for the title. And then I just wanted something. I needed something with the assonance. I needed a name that would go well with inside, and so Will became the name. And I'm glad you think it worked. I was
Perfect.
happy that it clicked.
It's perfect. I love, well, I love a lot of things about books, but I love titles. I love first lines. I love quotes. And as I read this, I kept thinking, like, gosh, whoever came up with that title, that was just a genius title that captured all of it together.
Thank you.
I have sticky notes. The
Oh
readers,
my
the
gosh.
listeners can't see it, but I do have sticky notes throughout the book. And I think for me, one of the things that really struck me, and this is as an adult reader as well, I really wished when I was a kid I had a Dr. Clarkson. The
Yes.
the nuggets that I was pulling from Dr. Clarkson were nuggets that, my adult self needed right now too. And there were two that stood out to me that made this book feel like it was like therapy too, in a really helpful way. The first one, and this is actually on a sticky note right over there on my wall, it says, any amount of time feeling bad is too long to feel bad. That was such a powerful one right off the bat. It spoke right to me. And as you said, a lot of people can't see what's going on, and so they think you're okay, or, oh, you can't no, that you must be playing that, or it's something that they can't quite believe. And to have someone in charge, who is in charge of your care, who's in a position of authority, say, hey, any amount of feeling bad is just not okay, and I'm here. That was a big moment for me in the book. And I thought, I have a doctor like that out of Tufts in Boston, who actually said to me something similar when I was trying to ask, like, what's going to work, what's the thing, and she goes, whatever makes you happy is going to work.
Yeah.
And that combined with Dr. Clarkson, I thought, oh man, this is going to be a little bit of therapy for
Yeah.
me. And then at the end of the book, Dr. Clarkson also says, something that I think all of us need to learn again and again and again and again, which is knowing when to ask for help is a sign of strength, right? Not the weakness that Will was thinking it was. And I'm just curious, did you have a Dr. Clarkson, or are you writing what you wished you had for readers?
Yeah, I have a doctor now who is and I'm trying to do the math as I'm talking, my fifth gastroenterologist. And I've had some good ones, out of five, I've had a number of great doctors. And I've been very fortunate in that. And, but it was my fifth doctor, and why I will always, even though I now have to travel quite some distance to stay with her, will always stay with her, because she expressed something along those lines, which, was not that quote exactly, because again, I'm distilling a lot of a timeline, condensing a timeline. But I had been, when I first moved to New York City, I had started out with a doctor, just, looked on my insurance, who's in New York City, wasn't asking around for referrals. And partly that was just because I was 22 and making a lot of big decisions very fast. I was like
Right.
sleeping on a friend's couch trying to find an apartment. And it was like, I need a doctor here. But that doctor expressed what I have since heard from a lot of, Crohn's patients, autoimmune patients, chronically ill patients, as being the case, which is, that doctor was very much like, let's wait and see. Let's give this some time. Let's
Mhm.
let's let this new medicine kind of settle into your system and see how it's going, because, they're not wrong. I read a lot of research studies as I was writing this book, just trying to make sure that I wasn't limiting the scope of my book to my personal experience of the medical system, but rather like know what the, you know, generally prescribed treatment for a kid in Will's position would look like, or what the most common advice would be. And I think it is actually a sort of common thing with a chronic illness that you'll have a doctor who says, like, we need to be managing symptoms right now, or we need to be managing expectations, even, because you need to understand that you're going to have this forever. You need to understand that there are going to be some days where you feel bad. So what we need to do is find the combination of things that kind of makes you feel a little bit better, but you might have to accept that your
Yeah.
baseline of good health is never going to be what it used to be. And that might just have to be okay. And so, having come from that to then finally my disease just progressed to a point where that doctor said, you know what, I think I actually need to refer you to a specialist who, is at this very super specialized Crohn's center in New York City, which was at the Weill Cornell Medical Center, the Joel Roberts IBD Center. So I was referred to a doctor there. And the fact that coming from that experience to having a doctor, the first time I tried a new medicine and it still wasn't quite working, and I said, you know what, I think it worked. Maybe we just have to give it some time. And she said, no, we're gonna try something else,
Yeah.
because if this one isn't working for you, we need to find the thing that works. And it was like, yeah, you're right. Like, that is the way that it should go.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be scheduling a 6 month follow up and tell you how bad the last 6 months were. It should be,
Yes.
and so I will forever be grateful to that doctor for, like, open. And I'm so glad that you have a doctor too who is of that mindset, because it really is like, when you have a chronic illness, you know you feel like you're one of the lucky ones if you have a doctor who believes that, because that's what you want to believe too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's worth it when you find that one after however many you have seen before, to have someone that has that faith in you
Yeah.
and what they can do for you. And that came through so strong in this book, that I think if I didn't have that, I would have went, well, wait a hot second. This is available, right? This is available to me. I can find that there is a Dr. Clarkson out there, and I will
Yes.
figure out uh who and where he or she is. So
Yes.
again, I think the book is so important on so many levels, whether it's a middle grade reader who is reading it, or an adult like me who is kind of reading to my inner child and to my adult self. It really is such a gift. Such a gift.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. And if I can add just on this subject, I'm so excited that I'm getting to talk to someone who zeroed in on those facets of the book coming from a personal place, because, I don't get to talk to many readers coming from that perspective. And so, just any who, for whom this part of the story is resonating, the one thing that that I would add to that is, oh my gosh, and now I I said this because you pulled out that second quote.
Oh,
And
asking for help, a sign of strength.
yes, thank you. I
You're
was like,
welcome.
I'm blanking on my own quote for my own. But that asking for help is a sign of strength. Like, it is so hard for the middle schooler who is going through the chronic illness experience, because one of the things I tried to show in the book is that I think a lot of us are used to this paradigm of doctors and medical professionals being able to do the test that shows what you need. So if the test comes back that you have, you know, strep or whatever, then here's the antibiotic that you need, take it, and you'll feel better. And so when you have a disease where instead it's like, the reality is, we need to know if you feel okay on this particular medicine, because that's how we know it's working or not, is how you feel. That's kind of a big ask for kids, and it's so hard, because as a kid you're like, I think I feel okay, I just know that I feel worse than I did before. Is that what we're going for? And meanwhile, it's so embarrassing to talk about these symptoms. Like, I don't want to describe them in detail. I tried to get at that in the book too, that some of the symptoms that you have with Crohn's and are they feel so mortifying. And when you go in and you have, I often had the experience, because I was, a middle schooler, but also I had this like might be TMI, but all the doctors told me I had good veins. You have good veins, so let's get the phlebotomist who needs some practice in here.
Oh no.
Like practice drawing blood. So I had that experience a lot of like student doctors and residents. Like, I would be asked the same set of questions 3 times because the third person was just getting their practice hours in or something, and I didn't know any better than to say like, oh, it was kind of embarrassing to answer these questions the first time. Do I really have to answer them 2 more times? But yeah, this is all a very roundabout, long way of saying that I wanted to have a doctor say, that asking for help is a sign of strength, because self-advocacy is such a big, hard-earned part of chronic illness too. Like, and for kids, I know that is going to be something that takes a lot of time to develop, because at first you just want the doctor to come in and be able to run the test and tell you what you need and have that be the end of it.
Right. Right. And just fix it. But
Yep, just fix it.
I can't quite do that. And your book gives them the chance to think about all of those things in a safe space, to feel like, okay, I'm okay. I'll be okay. Right. Because
Yeah.
they're seeing that here.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love this book. Are you working on anything else? Any sneak peeks you can give us before we close out?
I am. I'm working on another middle grade novel right now. Once again, I'm trying to work some genre elements in, and we'll see. We'll see how that pans out. I think the most of a tidbit that I can give you with confidence is that it's about a blended family. It's about a character who whose parents are divorced and whose mom has started dating a man with a son who's just a little bit younger than he is. And so that almost brother, he's trying to figure out, what do I call him? He's not my stepbrother if my parents aren't married. Like, is he my almost brother? But his almost brother will be starting at his middle school shortly. And so navigating that relationship, there are some twists relationship that again, like, involve a little bit of a genre element that I don't want to spoil too early.
No spoilers.
but that's the kernel of it, is two almost brothers at the same middle school and navigating that blended family dynamic.
Something a lot of us will be able to relate to as well.
I hope. I hope so. It's some late nights and weekend writing right now, and some days it seems like it's going great. I was trying to make a big push for NaNoWriMo to finish this draft, and I think I might get close, but I don't know that it's going to be. I think the ending's going to be pretty rough. So,
well, it's further than it was, right?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
So where can listeners find you online to grab a hold of your books or just to be in the know for the next one?
Yeah, so I do have a website, and I know my last name is as hard to spell as it is to pronounce, but my website is my name, andreweliopulos.com. And I do have an Instagram as kind of the social media where for now I've gravitated. And it's funny when you write for middle graders, you sometimes kind of go like, who am I speaking to on social media exactly? Like this
Right.
post isn't going to go out to my target audience.
That's a good
So,
point.
you just kind of always feel a little bit like I don't want to say putting stuff into the ether, but I sometimes struggle with like,
Yeah.
who's my audience on this post right now? But I did have the one teen book, like I said, it come out during the pandemic in 2020, and it felt like I was connecting with YA readers at that time. So we'll keep it up for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to put links in the show notes so that if someone is confused on that spelling, they won't have to. They can just click right on it and head to both of those places to find you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Stephanie.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for this conversation. I was so excited to chat with you, and I just loved the book. I love the book. I'm going to share it widely, and I hope all listeners will go out and just grab a copy for themselves, for a child in their lives, or just to have for when that time comes and you get to match it with someone who is going to love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Okay, everyone, that's it for today, and I'll see you inside the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.